This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. We talk a lot about what the Browns could do and what the big moves that the Browns could do in free agency could be. But the reality with the Cleveland Browns right now is that they're already a really good team, right? We're talking about a team that, again, went 11-6 with 26% of the salary cap on injured reserve. No matter how you try to dice it up, deny it, that is an undeniable statistic of talent on the roster. So when I see articles about the Browns needing to get a big name here, needing to get a big name there, I think it misses the mark because this roster is pretty good. And the fact that they're just able to retain most of these players is probably going to be good enough for them to be in contention if they get good to great quarterback play this year. So instead of doing the pie in the sky stuff, the big names that the Browns could get that's going to garner a lot of interest, today I want to talk about what I think is a realistic Browns free agency guide and what that looks like given the amount of money that the Browns are going to be willing to spend, the amount of money that the Browns want to save so they can roll over in cap. Now, the first things first, I think the Browns are listed at like $6 or $7 million in like positive cap space right now. They're going to restructure Deshaun Watson. They're going to have some contracts that have an auto restructure like Myles Garrett, where you don't really hear news that they restructured, but the way it works for the cap, they basically restructured. And the Browns will probably be somewhere around $60 to $65 million in cap space after all of that. Now, that doesn't mean that the Browns are going to try to spend all $60 million of that cap space this year. And maybe if they see a big name become available that they really, really think that they can get, they might go after it. If it's a game changer like a Chris Jones or maybe a Jonathan Allen, they might try to go after. But for the most part, they're going to be not conservative with their budget. They're still going to spend about $30 million to $35 million on bringing in new players, but they're not going to be reckless with their money, which is not what we could describe Andrew Berry and this regime as being. So who do I think are the realistic additions to this Cleveland Browns team, and why do I think that those additions can really help put an already great roster over the top? I'm going to start with one addition that I think that they could bring in is DJ Reader. Now, DJ Reader is falling in an interesting part because I think this conversation comes up with him and it's going to come up with somebody that the Browns might be able to re-sign in Zadarius Smith. This defensive line class for edge rushers and interior guys is actually really, really good. And I think that works to the detriment of both DJ Reader and Zadarius Smith. The reason I think that is because when you look at the guys available, there's a lot of players who are very young that are available. There's a lot of players who are kind of like a Chase Young, right? Where he's a younger player who's still seen as having a lot of potential. So maybe if you're a team, you're willing to give a long-term deal to that guy. And usually in markets like this, from what I've experienced, the veteran players are the ones that suffer, right? If we're looking at the guys who could hit raw free agency, Josh Allen, right, could hit raw free agency. We know that Chris Jones is going to hit unrestricted free agency. Brian Burns might be available in unrestricted free agency. Justin Madubuike is going to be available in unrestricted free agency. Christian Wilkins, Danielle Hunter. Then you got guys who are kind of that up-and-coming tier, like a Chase Young, Jonathan Grenard. And then you have your veteran players who, if we know anything from free agency, those guys, right? The big name veteran players that are about 28, 29, 30 years old, right? It's just out the range of a new contract. Those are the guys that tend to linger around in free agency, right? Chase Young probably going to get a multi-year deal from somebody just because he's young and you can believe that he's going to improve. Jonathan Grenard, same deal. Justin Madubuike, all of those guys are going to get a swiped up on the first day of free agency, leaving these veterans in an awkward spot to where there might not be anybody available who's willing to give long-term big money to those guys. And if that happens, which I think it's possible, like really possible, that happens with somebody like DJ Reader, because not only is he an older playmaker, but he's also a defensive tackle, which makes him more likely to be forgotten about when they're throwing out this money in free agency. And I think that he might be somebody who's looking for a 1-year deal in day 3, 4 of free agency. And if you can do that with DJ Reed, I think that makes a ton of sense. And you get him for like 1 year, somewhere like $10 million, or maybe you do a 2-year deal so you can push some money down the road. But, you know, just a similar, like that similar slot that they've had for Jadeveon Clowney, where it's like 1 year, 10, the similar slot that they have for Zadarius Smith, 1 year, 10. I think DJ Reader could be the recipient of that. The reason I think DJ Reader could be the recipient of that is twofold. One, I think the Browns are encouraged with what they saw from Alex Wright, and I think they're encouraged from what they saw out of Obo Okoronkwo, and I think that they're comfortable with the idea of not having a Zadarius Smith, but being able to give more time to Obo and more snaps to Alex. And I think they feel like they'll be able to make up the difference and get the same pressure numbers from that edge combo, because they think that those players have a better upside at this point of their career. So that leads you to think, okay, if you don't think you have to really improve the edge side, and remember, Isaiah McGuire might factor into this, somebody that they drafted as well. But if you feel like that edge room is kind of fine, right? Like, okay, yeah, we could lose a guy there, we could lose a veteran there, but I think we'll be fine. Then you move to the interior. And I think this defensive interior needs one more guy. I think they thought that guy would be Siaki Ika. That's a project that looks like it's going to take a little bit more time to develop, if it develops at all. And I don't think that that's going to be something that you can rely on this year. I do think they'll bring back Maurice Hurst. I'll talk about that later. I do think they'll bring back Shelby Harris. We'll talk about that later. They might even bring back Jordan Elliott, but Jordan Elliott or Shelby Harris, whoever you want, they'll bring back those guys. But they need one more body, right? They have Dalvin Tomlinson, but they need one more body. And I think that body you can bring in that will really be a difference maker is DJ Reed. You talk about, you want chaos creators on this defensive line, because especially in the interior, you're going to get a lot of two-way goals with how teams try to defend against Miles. And with those two-way goals, you're going to have linebackers that can play off of it, and you want to have one, those linebackers have to space to be able to play make, like JOK. And also you want defensive tackles who can get to the quarterback, right? Create pressure, create havoc. Because what we've seen is that the area that benefits the most on the defense from how teams defend Myles Garrett is not that other edge area. We always kind of assume that would be the case, but that's not necessarily the case. The area of the field and the players that benefit the most from what I've seen when Myles Garrett gets that Calvin Johnson treatment at the defensive end position is linebacker, box safety, whenever you have Grant Delpit in there, and defensive tackle, right? Dalvin Tomlinson had a 3-sack game because of how teams were like refusing to not double Myles Garrett, and how that leads to a lot of two-way goals for your interior players. So I think if you're the Cleveland Browns and you want to break that defensive plan against Myles Garrett, you want to break it from the interior of that rush, and then use those big bodies that you have in there that you can continue to rotate in. Because if you have a rotation of Dalvin Tomlinson, DJ Reader, Shelby Harris, or Jordan Elliott, and Maurice Hurst, you constantly have fresh hellraisers on that defensive line, which is going to constantly put pressure on those protection plans for Myles Garrett, causing them to either abandon it or live with what happens. And then if you have somebody like DJ Reader in there, it's going to make it very difficult for them to live with what happens. DJ Reader is a definitive playmaker. Yes, he slowed down a little bit because of injury, but I still think he's really, really good. He has like a couple good years left. We saw him be the best defensive player for the Cincinnati Bengals in a year where they went to the AFC Conference Championship game just a year ago. We know he's still capable of playing really good football. He's also a stout run defender, and he's also also somebody who can win if you put him in a one-on-one, two-way go type situation on a consistent basis. I like DJ Reader. I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think the value will be there because if you look at the market, a lot of edge rushers that are younger than him, a lot of defensive tackles that are younger than him. If he's trying to get a multi-year deal, by the time they get to him, they're not going to have any left, which leaves him right in Andrew Berry's wheelhouse where he could just go get a 1 year or 2 year short-term deal and kind of roll on with that. And I think that's the world that DJ Reader is going to be living in. And I think the Browns are going to have eyes on him. The next player that I think will be interesting for the Cleveland Browns can add, and I think he will really make this team better, is Mike Williams. Now, I know people are divided on Mike Williams, but I think the division has nothing to do with who Mike Williams is as a football player and more or less Mike Williams' reliability as a football player, right? Like he hasn't been healthy in a little while, and I think people have a little bit of cold feet there. And I think that cold feet's going to be something that reflects in the market where Mike Williams is probably somebody who should sign for $15, $17 million in this wide receiver market. He's probably going to be gettable on a $12 million over 2 deal with heavy incentives, right? So since you have to incentivize a lot of the contract, that means the cap number initially will be very low for Mike Williams and the guarantee number will be low. So it's going to be a very, very cap manageable deal for somebody like him. He's still young enough. He has a ton of experience and played some of his best football with the Browns' current quarterback, Deshaun Watson. We know that he has some chemistry and familiarity playing with Deshaun Watson. So when he goes into those scramble drills, it's not going to be that big of an adjustment. And there's a hole when it comes to the skill set of the Browns wide receiver room that they don't have to fill right now. And I think Mike Williams can fill it. I think that when people look at wide receivers, they tend to go, he's a number 1 receiver. He's a number 2 receiver. He's a slot receiver and kind of put receivers in boxes. I like to look at receivers for what their skill set is because their skill set can determine where they line up on the field and where they're best used on different concepts. I don't think it's strict. This is a number 1 receiver. This is a number 2 receiver. I think that's a very antiquated way of looking at things. So when I look at wide receivers, I look at their skill set. I look at Amari Cooper, dominant route runner, physical guy, can get a big play, can get a 50-50 ball, but not necessarily his specialty. Really, the most reliable receiver you have on the roster, can win a route and is a reliable first down guy. That's really what his skill set is. If that makes him a number 1 receiver, then that makes him a number 1 receiver. Elijah Moore is a bit more of a twitchy athlete, somebody you want to get the ball in their hands kind of earlier on, or you want to attack them downfield where they could double move somebody, right? Now, last year, I don't think we got to see the best out of Elijah Moore simply because I don't think the offensive line was at its best last year. And I think for Elijah Moore to be useful, he needs a good offensive line because his routes are going to take a little while to develop because that's how you kind of want to use a dude like Elijah Moore. But I think he kind of came on strong at the end. Again, I think he's a deep threat, downfield attack guy, double move attack guy, or somebody that you throw a couple screens to get downfield to get north a little bit. Then you have a giant gap. And that giant gap is you have nobody really to throw 50-50 balls. Even David Njoku, who you would think is a 50-50 ball given his size and the fact that he was a high jumper in college and almost Olympic level high jumper, I think, in college. You would think that he's a 50-50 ball guy, but that's never really been his forte. Yes, he can do it every once in a while, but David's never been a consistent 50-50 ball guy. He's more of a yak guy. Like you want to throw screens to David. You want to get David going downhill. You want to get the ball in David's hands, but you're not really throwing up 50-50 balls. Really, only guy you have that kind of fits that description is Cedric Tillman, but you don't know if he can be trusted to be where he's supposed to be on the field. And I don't know about you, but a 50-50 ball target requires a lot of trust, right? Like you have to trust somebody to throw 50-50 balls to them because you could change the game on one. And if they can't trust Cedric Tillman to run an out route when he's supposed to check to an out route, I don't know if they're going to get to the point to where they trust him to be a 50-50 ball guy this season, just realistically speaking. That's why I want Mike Williams, because Mike Williams is a 50-50 ball guy. He can be a big play threat downfield, and he could be somebody who's really useful to you in the red zone, where the Browns kind of struggled for the last couple of years offensively to finish these drives and score touchdowns. And I think he could be a huge addition there. He has the trust with Deshaun Watson, where Deshaun day one is going to trust him enough to throw those 50-50 balls. He has the athletic ability and the size to capitalize on it, and that's what he's doing his best. I also think Mike Mike Williams is at his best when he's not asked to be a number one receiver and when he's asked to kind of be an auxiliary receiver, right? Somebody who's more in a role than somebody you're going to depend on 3rd and 10. I think that that's where Mike Williams is at his best. I think this situation makes sense for both him and Deshaun Watson. I think this makes sense for Mike Williams a ton. I think this makes sense for the Cleveland Browns. I think it's going to make sense financially. I know the injury thing kind of concerns people, and maybe he's not going to be able to separate, but he's physical and big enough to where I don't really worry about that because he's always been able to separate enough to make plays and get downfield. The next guy I'm going after is at running back, and that's A.J. Dillon, former Green Bay Packer. Now, I think the mistake that people are making in this offseason cycle is assuming who the Browns are trying to replace at the running back position. Some people are thinking of this and thinking of it as the Browns are trying to replace Jerome Ford. I don't think they see it like that. I think the Browns see this as we got to replace Kareem Hunt. And Kareem Hunt's role on the team last year was short yardage situations. And I think A.J. Dillon can hold it down in short yardage situations. He's also enough of a veteran that if Nick Chubb does have to be on a snap count at the beginning of the season, or if he can't start the season next year, you can start A.J. Dillon and run Jerome Ford off of that. I think Jerome Ford proved himself as a capable receiver out the backfield and a good blocker on 3rd downs. And I think that role is still going to be there for him. But I think they do need to replace Kareem Hunt's role because it doesn't seem like they're interested in bringing him back again. And I think, honestly, at this age for Kareem Hunt, A.J. Dillon would be more of an upgrade for what they want to do because he has some feature back potential, which Kareem Hunt at this point doesn't seem to have that feature back potential. But yeah, bring A.J. Dillon here, 1 year, $3.5 million. He'll be a situational back, and I think that would be fine for this Cleveland Browns team. The last free agent that I'm going to talk about the Browns bringing in is Jordan Brooks. I think this will be probably the biggest deal that they give out, $36 million over 3 years. Obviously, that wouldn't be a flat 12, but it will be 36 over 3. The reason I think they'll go after Jordan Brooks is they're betting a lot on JOK, right? They're really going all in on the JOK experiment. And JOK is probably at his best in the NFL, the closer to the line of scrimmage that he's at, right? You kind of want JOK to attack downhill more than you want him backpedaling into coverage. Not to say that he's bad in coverage, but his instincts, his athleticism, and his quickness really suit him better to be closer to the football and closer to the line of scrimmage, in my opinion. So I think if you're going to pair JOK with anybody, you pair him with somebody who's more comfortable in coverage situations like a Jordan Brooks. And I think that makes sense. Like him pairing up with Bobby Wagner last year in Seattle, Jordan Brooks pairing up with Bobby Wagner last year in Seattle and kind of being helpful to that, I think is a similar kind of dynamic that you can have with JOK. JOK is a little bit different of a player than Bobby Wagner. Obviously, there's a size difference, but instinctually, they kind of both kind of play near the line of scrimmage, right? So I think that will be some kind of built-in chemistry, and that will really make a ton of sense for the Cleveland Browns going forward. You get some solid linebacker play. You also get to kind of solidify that up with JOK, and you also get a coverage linebacker. You can also think that they might not go the route of getting another coverage linebacker, and maybe they just quasi make that Grant Delpit because they've already extended him and he kind of plays the safety position. So watch out to see what the Browns do with that. If they bring back Ronnie McLeod or if they try to go hard at a strong, like a true safety in this draft, maybe that might be where they're going. But I think with JOK being as good as he is around the line of scrimmage, especially attacking screens, you're probably going to want somebody to lighten the load off of him when it comes to kind of having to go backwards or having to be in coverage. So I think that they're going to look to kind of solidify JOK's role now that he's going to be the Mike linebacker going forward. And I think that Jordan makes a ton of sense for the Cleveland Browns. All right, let's talk about the guys who are going to return. I briefly talked about the defensive linemen. Maurice Hurst, I think he's going to return. He's going to be super cheap to bring back $2 million probably on a 1-year deal. Really did a good job penetrating. If he stays healthy, I think he's a good player. The problem with him is just staying healthy. Shelby Harris, I thought he added a nice presence there, made some like low-key good plays, was really good at batting down footballs at the line of scrimmage. I think he's really helpful to have out there as well. I think this defensive line is the heart of this defense, and I think the interior is going to be what puts the most pressure on these plans that they have, these protection plans that they have for Myles Garrett going forward. I can only expect the NFL to double down on what they did with Myles Garrett and how teams just shifted everything over to him. And if they do that, I think the Browns need to double down on the interior, the defensive line, make sure they're as strong as possible in that interior. Zadarius Smith is a weird one, right? I kind of talked about this at the beginning when I talked about DJ Reader. I think that the projections for Zadarius Smith right now are like he's going to sign a 2-year deal worth $24 million over 2 at an average of 12. I don't know if Zadarius Smith gets that for the same reasons I don't think that DJ Reader is going to hit his projections on PFF, because he is somebody who kind of is in this odd spot. He doesn't have the sack numbers. Yes, the pressure numbers look good, but NFL teams are going to find any excuse not to pay him. Not only do they have the excuse of the sack production dipping, not only do they have the excuse of the age for Zadarius Smith, but also they're going to be like, hey, you didn't have these sack numbers next to Myles Garrett and the impact. They can feign a lot of reasons to not bring him in that's really going to lower his market value. And then you have on top of that, this edge class and free agency is so young, and they're going to be teams willing to spend that money on a Chase Young, but not necessarily on you. And I think that that's going to lower his number to below $10 million, as low as like to 8, maybe 6.5 if you incentivize a lot of the contract. And I think that that's going to make him somebody that the Browns can get on a low-key kind of deal. And I think that that's how they'll try to go after it, right? The Browns having that extra cap space. So, like, let's say the Browns look to spend $30 million, right, on free agency, but they want to have some cap rollover. Part of what that cap rollover allows you to do is heavily incentivize some contracts. They'll do something similar with Nick Chubb, where they'll lower his cap number at the beginning of the year, but load that thing up with incentives. So if he hits it, okay, he hits it, but it goes into the rollover for next year, and you're going to lose things like Jack Conklin's contract next year, right? So they're not really worried about the money for next year, and because they have mechanisms in place to make sure that they can save that money. So incentive-based contracts are what they're going to be looking at. And when you look at the guys that I have on this list, outside of Jordan Brooks and maybe A.J. Dillon, DJ Reader, Mike Williams, and Zadarius Smith really fit the bill of guys that you can get on a lower number today, but you can incentivize the contract enough to where it's going to be attractive for them and attractive for you, and it's going to make sense money-wise, cap-wise for the team going forward. Mike Williams especially, right, where you can guarantee, like, it could be worth up to $24 million, but he's going to get like 12 over 2 or something like that, right? So I think that that's really how the Browns are going to look at it. Like, okay, we just need some pieces around the edges, and I think DJ Reader will make a ton of sense. I think you might be able to bring back Zadarius Smith, and the Browns are in the comfortable negotiating position to where I don't feel like they need to bring back Zadarius, but they might want to bring back Zadarius, right? They don't really have to. They have enough at the edge position opposite of Myles to be fine. It would be good if they could bring back Zadarius, and I think it would be a good thing for both sides, because I think Zadarius is going to have a big year next year. I think he just had an inexplicably down year. He was playing injured most of the year. But I think he'll have a big year. But I think his number is going to lower for the Browns. I think they might be able to bring him back. That might be a surprise, because I think people are assuming he's going to get 12. And if you assume he's going to get 12, then the Browns aren't going to be able to bring him back. But if he does get to that lower number, or gets to a point to where it might make sense to sign an incentive like latent deal, the Browns can get him back easily. As far as extensions go, I think the Browns will probably bring back JOK. You're going to have to give, $12 million a year to Jordan Brooks. So you probably give JOK 15 to 16 a year. So it's looking at 45 or 50 over 3. I think that's fine. It's like, if you get JOK under that number, it's fine. I think that might end up being a bargain by the second year of that deal, if he explodes and gets to where he wants to get to. I think some pie in the sky ideas that could kind of happen. Like, there's kind of a chance that this could happen. Mike Evans is much less likely. Like, I don't think Mike Evans is really a reality for this team. But the one pie in the sky idea for the Browns is Chris Jones. And I think some things have to happen in order for that to be a possibility. I think Chris Jones has to be unable to get the 4-year, $120 million deal that he's looking for. Like nobody offers him that or even offers him anything close to that. They're offering him numbers that are closer to like 22, which I don't think he wants over a long-term deal. And that puts him in a situation where he would want to sign a short-term deal just to re-enter the market next year where there might be less guys available that could drive down his price and drive up his numbers so somebody signs him, but also so he could retain his youth, right? Like he doesn't want to be 32 hitting the market again. He wants to probably be still like in his 20s to early 30s. 32 is early 30s, but in the NFL, it's not early 30s. So he probably wants to be in that situation. And if that's the situation, then the Browns all of a sudden become a suitor, right? Where they can offer maybe a year 25 with $5 million in incentives, or maybe they just say F it and offer him like 28, you know what I mean? Like maybe even 30. It would be pie in the sky. It would be crazy if they can get it done. But I don't think that that is the most unique of alternate realities, if you get what I'm saying. Like I think that of all of the crazy ideas, that's the one that might have a chance of possibly happening. So that would be my one, like, okay, Hail Mary, that could happen. It's crazy, but it could happen, is Chris Jones. And if they did, oh my God, I would hate to be an offensive lineman blocking against this Browns defensive line. But I think it's also important to keep in mind what the Browns won't do. And I think there's this energy for whatever reason within the fan base for the Browns to kind of overreact to what happened last year. The Browns had a bunch of injuries last year. And it's easy to say we must get all this depth at all these different positions because what if we get injured again? But it's important to remember that the Browns front office is not a reactionary front office. They're not going to overreact to one thing that happened this year or one thing that happened that year. They've been able to take the whole sample in effect and kind of work off of that. And I think they feel fine with their backup situations. And I think they should feel fine with their backup situations. A lot of people feel like the Browns need to go out and sign 5 backup running backs and 45 backup tackles. I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that that's how they feel. I think they feel like the way that they've built this roster was really stress tested last year, right? You lost a lot of players in a lot of key positions, but you still went 11-5. And I feel like they feel like that stress test was successful because it was successful, right? How the Browns built this roster was successful. People can complain, even though I think it's silly. They can complain all they want about the Browns not being prepared enough at backup quarterback, but they were, right? They won most of the games that they did not have their starter in. They also won most of the games that they had their starter in. The Browns defense, like I think people overthink the backup quarterback thing. I think people think that you need to have a championship caliber backup quarterback, and I think that's stupid. There's no such thing as a championship caliber backup quarterback. What allows a team to survive a quarterback being injured, right? When we look at the teams, it's not the backup. Nick Foles went a million different places, started a million different places, and never looked like a Super Bowl caliber quarterback, did he? Case Keenum took the Minnesota Vikings to an NFC championship game. Has that really changed how Case Keenum has been for the rest of his career? We've seen it in Cleveland. He's not taking you to the NFC championship. The backup quarterback is not taking you to a new place. He's not taking you to a new ceiling. He's not going to continue to be as good as a starter. That's just nonsense. But if you want to be able to survive a quarterback getting injured, a starter getting injured, it's about how good the team is around the quarterback position. And the Browns had an excellent team around the quarterback position, a defense that was good enough to help you beat teams like the 49ers with PJ Walker at the quarterback position, a defense that was able to dominate towards the end of the season that allowed Joe Flacco to throw a league high in interceptions during that 2-month period, but also give him enough opportunities to where he could lead the league in touchdowns. right? The defense is what helped the backup quarterback situation all last year. Without that defense, we could have the same guys being the backup quarterbacks that we had this year, and it would have been a very different story. We would have had a very bad record. But since that defense was able to perform at such a high level for most of the year, you were able to get away with the backup quarterbacks that you have there. And next year, it's going to be no different. If Deshaun Watson goes down and you got to throw in DTR, it's not going to be whether DTR can step up and play as good as Deshaun Watson. That's nonsense. He's not going to be that good. But it's going to be about whether the defense can support a young quarterback long enough for that quarterback to get to a point to where he's acceptable. That's the support around the quarterback position. And last year, the Browns had that support. They were able to go 11-6 despite the injuries. And I think it's going to be the same story next year, where if they do have an injury, it's not going to be about who the backup is. It's going to be about who's around the backup. Think about it like this. Jacoby Brissett played really good at quarterback the year where Deshaun Watson got suspended for 11 games. He played really good. Arguably better than any backup, especially more efficient and safe with the football than any backup that we had this year, right? Even Joe Flacco, the turnovers are still there. You still have to acknowledge the turnovers. Now, I'm not going to say that Jacoby Brissett was better than Joe. I think that's debatable, though. Like, they were comparable levels of play. The Browns still had a losing record with Jacoby Brissett because at the end of the day, the defense stunk. And no backup quarterback is going to be able to overcome a situation in which their defense stinks. The defense is what helps your backup quarterback, right? The defense is what helps the quarterback position. We don't ever factor in the defense into quarterback help, but it's a huge part in helping quarterbacks because it gives them more possessions. It allows them to make more mistakes. It just makes things more comebackable. Like when you make those mistakes. And I think that that's one of these things that we don't ever talk about. We talk about the backup quarterback position. I don't think that's what's important. I think what's important is the support around the backup quarterback position. David Njoku matters in that conversation. Amari Cooper matters in that conversation. I think it was proven last year where the Browns were still able to go 11-6 despite having to win games with 4 different quarterbacks despite the season. And the one thing that was consistent was the defense. Once that went, it didn't matter who was at the quarterback position, right? If the Browns had a bad game defensively, the quarterback position, how they played, irrelevant. Because it's about the defense, especially when a backup quarterback's in there. But that's my thoughts. I don't think the Browns are going to go too crazy in free agency, but I don't think they have to. I think they have a really good roster. I think they can make a couple key signings here, and that will really tighten up this roster, right? DJ Reader is going to add another heat-seeking missile to this defensive line that already has weapons of mass destruction. Mike Williams is going to add a unique skill set that I think this offense has been missing for a little while, and some familiarity that I think has been missing with Deshaun Watson and his wide receivers at the quarterback position. And give him somebody he could throw those 50-50 balls to, and I think there will be a high level of success with that. A.J. Dillon gives you an upgraded short yardage back and somebody who can step in and be a feature back in the case that Nick Chubb is not available week 1 or might be on a little bit of a snap count at the beginning of the season. And I think Jordan Brooks is the type of linebacker that you want to pair with JOK. I think all of this makes sense. All of this is realistic enough to bring in. All of this can fit in the budget. All of this can be maneuvered in the cap for years to come. And it allows the Browns to have flexibility for the years to come after this season. So that's why I think. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.